good morning, good evening, and an insomniac doesn't need to say good night.
Good night. It's over already? We just
No,
started.
this is the beginning. This is the beginning. This program was made possible by the generous support of John McCallum, Cosmac, Kelly DeMall, Anita Rivnik, Metap, this guy again?
Is it a guy? Is it a gal?
Is it a person?
I don't know. Is it
an
an
entity?
android?
It could be a corporation.
Is it another name for abacus?
They never said anything.
They never said anything. They
didn't comment.
They didn't comment.
So we could just say whatever.
I guess. Okay, whatever.
Perfect.
Okay.
Michael Housel.
Mm-hmm.
And a whole list of people, which we cannot say here because of the High Council of Human Consumption.
But we can really think about them really hard.
Thoughts and prayers.
All right, ready? And, you remember that guy?
Oh, yeah. This person.
Oh, yeah.
I almost forgot about that person.
Wow.
That person's great.
They've been that one right there has been around for a long time.
This one's my favorite.
Okay.
Don't tell anyone. All right. Well, if you'd like to support us in our recording efforts, you can do so at patreon.com/Sleepless Knights podcast. And remember, only one D, right, Paul?
Yes.
Sure. In podcasts. Because we want to find people with real jobs who can support the show. Thank you.
Good night.
Attention, Sleepless Knights. Thank you for consuming this OSI 74 product broadcast live from the Black Knight satellite. For optimum performance and safety, your host, Mr. Lobo, asks that you please listen to these instructions carefully. When in a hospital or other healthcare facility, observe the restrictions on the use of electronic devices. Switch off before boarding an aircraft to prevent interference with communications systems. Do not operate this device in the presence of flammable gases or fumes, chemical plants, or where blasting operations are in progress. Always listen hands-free while driving a vehicle. Failure to observe these instructions may lead to immediate termination. It's time now for the show to begin. Thank you. Have a very pleasant evening.
In the pre-beginning. Before the beginning, there was the beginning of the beginning.
Is this the time before time?
This is in the land before time before time. In the before times, before time was time. There was the time before that time, which was the pre-beginning.
And it was timely.
And there was much rejoicing.
At least for a while.
Well, rejoicing might be too strong a word. There was somewhat.
There was a lot of feet dragging.
Little feet dragging. Maybe some sort of.
A lot of blue skying, as you like to say.
Blue skying. A lot of bitching.
A lot of bitching.
So much bitching. But that's how podcasts are born, right?
Yes.
Just middle-aged guys.
I believe that was
bitching.
the thing in the pre-beginning.
Usually about Star Wars.
It's just people bitching. So let's just put it on. Let's put it on paper.
Put it on tape.
Put it on tape.
Somehow.
Put it on
with no tape. So Paul was Paul and I was me, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Or were you were me and I was Paul?
I don't remember. What timeline is this?
I'm not sure. Anyway, I was myself and Paul was whoever he was.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul was producing, to my knowledge, you were going to conventions and doing videos at conventions.
Yes. How stupid was I?
And cosplay videos. They were great.
Cosplay videos and interviews.
The problem is they were way above the bar. You were the Ridley Scott of cosplay videos. You were putting so much into it that no one appreciated.
And just like Ridley Scott, look at where I'm at now.
So Paul was producing video. I was just starting the channel.
Mm-hmm.
OSI 74. And I don't even know if we had officially launched the channel yet when I met you.
I don't know. Like I had a booth and you had a booth. We had met at RetroCon.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if did I have my camera out or something. Some for whatever reason, maybe I stopped you when we shot the scene that maybe we will talk about, and I think you came to the booth afterwards, and you're like, oh well, I'm a producer and you're a producer, and here's some pamphlets and everything. You gave me all the pamphlets and everything.
And I think we had all this programming, and then one of the early things I remember is that I needed a lot of like the disclaimer and the ratings and all of these little bits of video that I wanted to put in front of the shows, and some of the promos with the sort of like the sweeping text with the gleam. I couldn't figure out how to do that.
Did we do that in trade?
I think we did do it
because I needed voiceover work for New York Comic Con, and I think that's what really got the ball rolling. Where it's like, I had these pamphlets. Maybe I should contact this guy.
So I did a voiceover. You needed which is perfectly apropos because I've done movie trailer voiceovers. So you did like sort of a parody horror movie trailer.
You did the voice and you did the art still that's in
there.
Yeah,
they did the art too. That's right.
Cosplay from hell in 3D.
It was kind of like a Ransom Note a little bit, where it was all pieced together. Yes. And cosplay from hell in 3D. And then there was like Return from, or the Son of.
Yes. Did you do all? I don't remember.
I think I did all the versions of it.
I couldn't remember if there was only one logo or if there was multiple.
I think there were multiple logos.
We just need to make it. That needs to be a thing.
It was like Return of the Son of the Bride of the cosplay from hell in 3D.
We started spitballing.
And I think we made several graphics for that, and then I did the voiceover, and then Paul did these things like, because I wanted them to be iconic. I wanted them to bear rewatching. These sort of bumpers that we would put on the front.
And you wanted to
every video
encapsulate like the 80s, 90s feel to television, kind of.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of research was looking at kind of how those bumpers would be for
all those
local
bumpers
stations
and also theaters too. Like I think the ratings thing, definitely we kind of just swiped right from the old MPAA ratings.
I don't think I did much. I think you gave me the ratings thing, and all I did was just dirty up and put some music. I don't even think it was supposed to originally have music. I just threw music.
Yeah, I think that I did the art, but then you put made it seem like it was on broken down film, and then added the music, which I think made it perfect, exactly what it needed to be.
That we see every Saturday night on Twitch.
Every Saturday night, yeah, exactly.
Twitch.tv/Cinema Insomnia.
And so there, I think that was the beginning of that of our association, and I think we got along quite a bit. I think one of the things that I wanted to mention, as far as in the pre-beginning, is that we would talk a lot. So we would do a little bit of work, and then there'd always be this talk session afterwards that would go late.
Yes.
And I think that
like
that
2
was
or 3 hours on the phone or wherever.
Yeah. The thought is that
in the car,
if we had a talk show of some kind, there'd be a lot to talk about, or that we should do a podcast.
Well, I remember, so we went to a diner in Harrisburg, and I think that's kind of the first time we were throwing that around, because I kept telling you about how I wanted to do a podcast. That I kind of like the idea where Kevin Smith would like take his films or whatever, and he would just provide commentary. And I thought that would be a fun thing, of something I wanted to do, where there were some films that I was involved in, and there's just some films that I was interested in, like say Frankenhooker or whatever. And we would just provide commentary, and people could just sync them up. They could listen to the podcast, they could watch the movie.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Yes. How many years later, and we still have yet to do it.
Why did we not do it like that?
And
that would have been so much better than what we ended up doing.
And that was my pitch. And then I remember you saying, well, you already had these assets. You had the music. You already had like a lot of the other stuff already there.
Right. Because the thing is horrornews.net or some horror. And we ended up giving them a sponsor bit or something in the beginning, because I felt like I was not taking a bite out of them, but they really wanted me to do a podcast for them. And it's not that I didn't have any problem with them. It's just that, one, I didn't want to do a podcast that was strictly horror, and I just kind of wanted to do it on my own terms to some degree. And I didn't like podcasts. First of all, I didn't listen to podcasts.
That was the holdup.
I didn't like podcasts. I didn't listen to podcasts, and I didn't like this idea that they had to be sort of, I don't know. In the beginning, I had a lot of resistance to them being informal and not having a lot of planning. It's okay. It's two half drunk guys talking out of their ass. the thing that whenever I'd talk to people who listen to podcasts, they would be like, that was the thing they liked about it, is that they weren't professional and they didn't have a radio voice and they weren't professional and they didn't know what they were talking about and they were just regular guys you could have a beer with. And I'm like, well, that's not me at all.
That's your thing. And then my take is that the only podcast I listen to is Kevin Smith, and all across all of his podcasts, all he ever talked about was Star Wars. So I think that's where the whole Star Wars thing kind of factored in, where it's just two old guys bitching about Star
Wars, yeah. And
but they were like, can we actually like stretch that out for a year? Like, how long could we actually bitch about Star Wars?
Yeah. And then we decided to go challenge ourselves and go the opposite direction and not talk about Star Wars.
Yes.
Which was a really interesting thing that became a running joke across the entire thing that we would every
just
episode with a one, we would not talk about,
because the whole idea was that by not talking about Star Wars, you're essentially talking about Star Wars.
Yeah, because you're talking around it, so everyone knows exactly what you mean, what you're talking about.
And when it just flat out says not a Star Wars episode, you already know what you're coming into.
Yeah, it's one of those like loaded things, like when people say, "Well, I'm just saying," or whatever. It's sort of like what's the thing that people always say when they like, they're saying it, but they're without saying it,
Right.
And so anyhow, that was sort of what that was happening there. And I guess, I guess we got to this point where we were having these with 3 a.m. conversation.
Yeah.
Right. That was
We're already doing it within our work.
That was one of the things, was the 3 a.m. conversation. We thought, well, if we could capture this, that might be fun.
And I feel like the diner itself kind of seeded stuff that ended up coming down the line as well. Like, because, we're initially talking at this Harrisburg diner.
Yeah.
And I believe even at some point you're like, if we could just bring in equipment in the diner and just record right here. We could just have a dinner conversation and just turn the mics on, and what happens.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a seed upon itself.
I think so too. And then we ended up kind of that idea of a podcast that's not rooted either, where we took it to the airport and the restaurant and in our car.
Yes.
I don't know a lot of podcasts, at least at that time, that really, other than someone sitting at their computer with headphones on, I don't know if there was a lot of
I'll shut my computer.
Paul shyly closes his computer.
Shut down the laptop, take off the headphones.
No, but I mean, obviously we're doing that right now, but I think that the fact that I think that I guess I kept throwing these challenges out there, like, can it be more produced? Can it have segments? Can we try a little harder? Can we make it a little smarter?
Can we try a little less? Sometimes we're trying too hard.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think on the one hand, I think that in some cases we were too hip for the room. In some other cases, I guess we weren't hip enough.
So like this diner was our constant meeting point because it was an hour away for both of us. So it was the central point for both of us. And we went there multiple times. So that probably kind of seeded the whole idea too of doing things in the car, because it's like, well, if I come directly to you, it's 2 hours. If you come directly to me, it's 2 hours. Or if we go to this diner, it's an hour for both of us. And I think that's kind of also another seeded.
Yeah.
That, and in addition to, we're constantly doing conventions together, and I was doing my thing or coming and helping you, so we were carpooling a lot. So that was kind of
it was definitely more convenient. And then I guess
is that a nexus point? Is that what's the what do they call that in the Marvel universe? The MCU?
Oh, right. Yes. Is it the nexus point?
Is it unchangeable point in history?
Fixed point
in history?
Fixed point in history, something like that. Yeah, I forgot. It definitely one of those. Yes, and I like the term nexus point. That sounds good. We'll go with that. But it is interesting, all of these elements and how they came together. And we did have that intro that we had Ophelia do.
Yes.
And
I mean, that was the big thing, is that you already had all this pre-produced
had the
stuff.
music. I think the theme is great. I thought that it was sort of somewhere between Late Night with David Letterman and Escape from New York. And I thought that would be a fun place to
Who
be.
would know 138 episodes later that you would have to listen to that theme?
Dun, 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 dun. But Mars did a great job. I never, it's I think it's the best theme of any podcast ever.
Samuel L. Bronkowitz presents a movie that will make you question if you'll ever cosplay again.
Feeling so good. What's going on?
Just when you thought it was safe to cosplay. From the people that taught you, Don't Tell Mom My Cosplay is from Hell in 3D, and Bride of the Sun, the cosplay from Hell in 3D. Check in your weapon and get your ticket for an epic event you will not want to miss. No critics think you should subject yourself to this film. Correction, all critics agree that this is the film of the year. The cosplay contagion runs. In The Return of the Cosplay That Came from Hell in 3D.
In the beginning, there was the actual beginning, which was after the pre-beginning, but before other beginnings that would begin.
Bum, bum!
And now, the actual beginning for the first time again.
The actual beginning.
Yes. So here we are at the actual beginning of the podcast. I think it was what, close to Christmas time?
I guess should we drop the year? I don't know if we ever really dropped the year in the pre-beginning, but this is 2017.
This is 2017. The pre-beginning.
Christmas. Why did we do why Christmas of all things?
I don't know. 2015 was I guess we didn't say that the did we say the pre-beginning was the.
I don't know if we ever mentioned it, but yeah. 2015 to 2017 is when we were floating this idea around.
And so into 2017, which again, you thought that was the beginning, right? You thought the pre-beginning was 2017.
Yeah, I thought
we had been floating around with each other for 2 years before it came.
We were apparently floating around, even because we were for me, I thought we were floating around for like a month or two, and then we just did this because I was like, why Christmas? And I'm like, because New York Comic Con and RetroCon are like in like October, November, somewhere around there. They're the last conventions of the year. Yeah. So I kind of felt like, well, maybe we were kind of kicking things around at that time. And then in 2017 or by Christmas, we had already shot the gun. Yeah. I was trying to keep it clean. It still didn't sound any cleaner. No. But apparently when we were going back and doing the research, there was a whole 2 years where we were throwing this around.
Trauma tour.
We'd done trauma tour. I guess we just increased our relationship, and I knew you were more than about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yes, thank you.
Action figures.
Well, and I think too that was the other thing too is that we had in the case of the trauma tour, like you had this
right
with trauma, but then you didn't have an interviewer.
So I had a friend who was helping me out doing. We had rotated through multiple hosts, and I had a friend who was helping me out. He helped me out with what would have been my last 2 years before Lobo took over and we did a fourth year. But he was doing it as a friend for friends as a friend,
as a favor
for a friend. But I knew like we were kind of hitting his limits for some things where we would get press only events to interview people. And we did an interview with Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell, which is a show about Satan and his minions.
Oh, okay.
And Harold was a very religious person, and he took it like a champ. But they're doing Hail Satan and everything.
But it was out of his
thing.
Zone, yeah.
And I kind of feel like I didn't want to make him completely uncomfortable when we took him to Uncle Lloyd and we were talking about pussy farts.
Yes, that would be way out of his element. If he's got some somewhat conservative values, that's probably not the best place.
I kind of feel like I probably should have reached out before we did this podcast and asked him, because maybe I did ask him and he might have turned me down.
Oh, I don't know.
Might have at that time. I kind of feel like it was that kind of at the end where he's like, because he did it for me for 2 years hosting duties. Yeah. The second year he did it solo. The year before there was 3 hosts.
Yeah.
And he said, he's like, I don't mind helping you out. This was fun and everything, but this is basically the end of the road for me.
Yeah.
And, that might have happened right before Trauma Tour.
And my feeling is that you were without a host, so you didn't tell any of this to me. So it might have been that he
might have been gone by then.
Already gone by then. But I thought it was perfect. The other thing is I thought it was perfect because I'm the cult movie guy, and this is like, the cult movie studio. So it did seem like a good fit to have me talk to that. I would at least know the movies and
yes. Well, heck, I think even when I pitched it to you, you're like, I'm in a trauma movie, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, I kept trying to impress that on Lloyd. Lloyd, I'm in the Tate, which sounds hilarious when you just say it out of context. So yeah, I am. And now I'm in a couple trauma movies.
Thanks to that.
Thanks to that. Yes, thanks to that. I developed an association with Dylan Greenberg, who she ended up being a filmmaker in her own right. And
she was the dairy editor when she was at Trauma.
Yeah. I don't know I still don't know what that means.
I recall
maybe
I thought we
editing
looked it up
the dailies. Maybe
we
just misheard her. I don't know.
Maybe I don't know. Maybe I mistyped it when I did the lower thirds.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Other than that one time, I don't know if I've ever heard the term dairy editor.
Yeah,
but maybe that's an inside thing with Trauma too.
Maybe.
But Dylan did a great tour, showed us everything, and then of course we met John Brennan, who went on to host, or not host, but produce and appear on Joe Bob Briggs's show, who he's since left.
Oh, has he left?
Yeah,
I thought he was still there.
Yeah, that's a long story.
Wow.
So we did get to meet some pretty great, and of course Lloyd. I think that's probably one of the best interviews I've ever seen with Lloyd.
And that's just getting to New York City. I believe I probably traveled down to you, stayed over, and then we traveled together.
Yeah.
I don't remember the details, but I seem to feel like that's probably where we probably spent a lot of time talking about the idea of the podcast, the podcast.
And then I guess we waited a long time before we finished it because we did that whole fake thing of me pretending to cut my hair and all that.
We have a tendency of doing this. We just recently had a discussion about it.
We might have done that like right early when we met, and then like 2 years later,
I feel that there was 2 years. I feel like there was a 2 year gap in Trauma Tour.
So it might have been that we might have been we might have been fixing up Trauma Tour or completing Trauma Tour just before the podcast, which collapses that time period of 2015 to 2017. So that might be if you start a project, you don't think about when you started the project, you think about when you finished it, right? You think, well, we did this in 2017. It's like, oh wait, no, we didn't do that in 2017. We finished it in 2017. I mean, right now I'm writing an episode of Cinema Insomnia that I started 8 years ago. So that's just how things happen.
I'm trying to look it up to see what the published date was on YouTube.
So the Horror News Net got Michael Joy, God bless him. He was very kind enough to just sort of
Trauma Tour went up in 2017, February of 2017.
Wow. So it is probably around the same time we were doing the podcast. We were putting that together.
Well,
right?
If it would be February 2017, that was the beginning of the year. We did the podcast by the end of the year.
Oh, okay.
Because we did it by December of 2017.
Oh, okay. So this was.
But I don't know how much time was in between when we shot. Well, it would have had been between 2015 and 2017 when we shot this.
Yeah. So there could have been almost 2 years in between there, or 2 different years,
or at least 1 year.
Or at least 1 year. And then of course later that same year we did the podcast. So that's again, that does collapse that time period a little more,
right?
If you think about it. So the Horror News Net wanted me to do a podcast, and I very politely sort of backed out of doing one for them in favor of doing one with Paul, because I liked the chemistry that I had with Paul, and I had confidence with Paul as a producer, and I just felt like it would be a better time. I would have a better time doing it this way, and we did have a good time, and we did crazy stuff.
A lot of weird stuff. We kind of briefly went over where Nada just became a thing.
Yeah.
We were just going to do the Nada Star Wars pilot. And there's little hints because the next one's not a Star Wars reboot, I think is the next one or whatever. So there's a little inklings that we were going to do Star Wars on the ongoing, or we're just going to make it a thing. But at some point, Nada just became our thing.
Yeah, we had the not a Jurassic Park episode.
Not a Jurassic Park, which was that was our first fan suggested episode. Because fans were like, oh, here's another movie you should not talk about.
Yeah. So that was another weird thing of
Fans
talking around.
just latched onto that.
Yeah. The other thing I think that's really funny too is I don't know if this probably wasn't in our first go around, but the non-denominational holiday special, was that ever part of?
I think the non-denominational came after the
our first
our second go at this
our other beginning, the third beginning of this. Well, you know, we do had a lot of our own traditions. And and then that first year we didn't do anything where we were all in the same universe, right? We didn't do.
No, that didn't happen. That didn't happen until
later,
until
right?
much later.
I think we were just kind of playing off of just how the multiversal everything was getting, and we just sort of.
I think because by that time we already had like the MCU finally come full circle. I'm pretty sure that we got the end game and everything by that time. So we were already starting to deal with multiverse. Plus, you and I were also taking pages from like the comic book stuff.
Yeah,
that was always multiverse.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, both of us, and this is the problem that I think everyone I know who has like even like the movie dumpster guys, they're creative guys, you know, who want to be doing creative things and telling stories, and you get stuck talking about other people's work,
right?
And I think that we were trying to, and just like I also do on Cinema Insomnia, to try to hybrid that to where it's like, okay, here we are talking about things that you know, but here this is also a platform where we can create and have our own stories and our own characters and our own things going on, and flex our creative muscle as well as flexing on everyone else's creative muscle, so to speak.
Yeah. So yeah, Not a Jurassic Park was episode 11. So that was that would be the first one.
The first one.
So
with the one.
By that time, fans were already kind of latching on to the idea that we were doing. And then within the first 10 episodes, we were already doing stuff in the car.
Yeah.
We hadn't gone to the diner just yet.
When did we go to the laundromat? I feel like
that doesn't happen until shortly thereafter. So what I see is Plot Holes and Potholes, The Voyage Home, The Road of Life, and Hypnotic Highway, which is episodes 7, 8, 9, and 10, which were all stuff that were in the car picking up Aaron from the airport and taking it back.
And was there anything in between?
No, because we were
bringing him to the airport and taking him from the airport.
We're talking in the podcast that we're doing Camp Lobo, and we have all these grand plans, and we're going to do all these things, including record podcasts. And now that Aaron was from California, we can incorporate Aaron in these podcasts. And we were just so bogged down with everything else, we had no time for the podcast. And it's like, well, we have to drive to the airport. It's an hour there and an hour back. Let's bring the equipment and just record.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what was it Dixie that actually initially started that, where it's like, we have time to kill. We have to record the podcast, but we have to go get Aaron.
Yeah.
Why don't we just utilize that hour and actually?
I don't know. That could have been Dixie that suggested that. I'm not sure.
No, those are an hour. I was gonna say, I know we started at a half hour.
It took an hour to get to the airport, and so there was just enough time to record a podcast in the car.
Record to the airport one, record from the airport another, record two.
God.
There might actually be it, because then the strip club is a diner, but we didn't record in the diner. We talk about it going.
I think
we
stopped, and then we ate, and then we got back.
Because then we were eating, and then we were like talking about all these like obscure, weird things that we could talk about in the podcast.
Yeah. Well, and like it was a car wash.
It was a car wash. I think it was a former Burger King.
Burger King that was a restaurant /
Mexican car wash, because it was
all the neon everywhere, and that was a very un-PC term that we used to use to describe like those websites that like have all the like the flames and the flashing GIFs everywhere, and those GeoCities, hamster dance, and it was always like that was like the reminded us of the Mexican car wash, which was sort of like all the chasing lights and every trying to as many possible bells and whistles as possible to I guess grab people from the street, bring them in.
Recording this podcast was, I don't know, a feat upon itself, because it's like I have to drive. I think I had a lavalier on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you might have, which by the way,
Mm-hmm.
how much does it say from 2017 to now, we're still using the same goddamn mic and we're still using the same goddamn recorder.
Oh, God. Couldn't we just do this on our phones now or something? Like, I feel like that this is just completely unnecessary. We have this, like, you're right. This is this.
Yes, that mounts to my camera.
Yes, for the recorder that mounts to your camera and these microphones that,
that was your microphone. We had been doing the podcast so often and stuff, and it kept getting misplaced and lost that you're just like, just take it.
Yeah.
And then this microphone I bought later.
So, but this microphone is probably 15 years old or something.
Yes. And then these are probably within the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Eventually picked up.
And then we've got the sort of classic mic stands
Yes.
that just go on a tabletop.
Mm-hmm.
And and this is a different computer at least though, isn't it?
Yes, this computer is. We never had a computer.
No.
Not usually. Not until like the second beginning.
No, we didn't have a computer. It's usually you just start recording.
We do just press record and
then at the end format the card.
Is it, I mean, is it
wasn't that was the joke? Because there's
format? Never release it.
Yeah, just reformat the card. Forget all about it.
But yeah, so I was wearing the lab. You're monitoring the gear, and then I believe Dixie might have been moving your mic back and forth to you and her.
I think you're right.
Or maybe you were moving the mic. I don't remember which way it went.
Yeah, I can't remember.
So that you could get Dixie and Aaron, who was in the back seat.
Yeah.
But it was kind of hard for me where it's like, I can't really monitor the audio or anything. I got to focus on the road, but I also got to talk bullshit too. There's just a lot of me swearing at traffic. And
yeah.
We're just describing stuff. I don't even know if 100% of the stuff was like, we were going to describe stuff that didn't exist, but I think it just ended up that stuff just did exist.
Yeah. I mean, I think we just sort of.
I think the only ones that we embellished on was the diner.
Yeah, I think that was the thing, is that we just embellished on the diner.
And then it's like, then it was Camp Lobo for a week and all those podcasts that we didn't record. And then it was back to taking Aaron back.
Oh boy. We had big dreams though. We really wanted to do, I think that's one of the things, is that our ambition is always much bigger than what we're able to.
We're looking back in hindsight with our rose colored glasses and just going, we dropped the ball on a lot of crap.
Yeah. Well, we always said this again, is most podcasts die after their third episode, right?
Yes.
And if they make it to their third.
I think I even presented you a statistic at one point.
It was
like if you lasted past your third episode, you had longevity.
And then there was another
Showed them.
Yeah. And then there's another milestone, which I can't remember what the other one is. I think there was the third episode, and then I think
wasn't there like a 50 and 100 or something?
And I think we, like I said, we hit all of those. We hit 50 episodes and we hit 100 episodes, not all at once.
Eventually. But yeah, Laundry Day was episode 14.
Okay.
We had 2 episodes before that. 12 and 13 was Recon and Wrathicon, because at one point we were going to be like, well, we do a lot of conventions. Let's talk about conventions.
Yeah.
And I think that fell apart fairly quickly, because we would record these like right after the conventions, and we were just dog tired.
Dead. Yeah.
It's like, I can't even I'm in the process of archiving these now.
Yeah.
And I just can't really. There's just so many that I can't even process what we went through at that time. From my memory, I just remember us just being tired.
We were. And, I think one of the things that's difficult too is that the podcast was always free form. So it wasn't like, it's not a one topic podcast. And I think that like most podcasts, it'll be like, episodes of Dark Shadows.
Right.
Right. Or
Frasier.
Right.
The Frasier podcast.
It's just one thing. We're going to talk about, Return of the Living Dead every week. We're just going to talk about Return of the Living Dead. We're just going to talk about slashers. So we don't really have that kind of thing. And so I think that the audience that's cultivated from something like that is that you've got these people who have this. They're one of two audiences, I think. People who have an extremely diverse palette of things that they're interested in listening to, and people who just like to hear us talk.
Right.
That's really it. Like because I can't imagine, like, especially someone like, I'm trying to imagine like someone who's like a fan of my show and is like, when is he going to talk about movies? When is he going to talk about cult movies? When is he going to talk about movies on the show? And we didn't really ever talk, hardly ever talk about the kind of movies that I talk about on cinema.
Right.
Inside.
I think even in the podcast, we never really it wasn't until the later years did we ever really talk about anything specific. We always saved stuff up for the nada so that we could talk around it for whatever reason.
Yeah.
We're getting tight on time, but I just wanted to hit up that by episode 16 is when we started introducing special guests, and then 18 and 19 we get, or not 18, 19 and 20 we start getting our special guests. We get Sleazy.
Oh yeah, Sleazy.
And, well, the first special guest was Eric.
Oh yeah, Eric Miller, and that was at a diner too.
Which was at a diner, and that's where the Clean House special comes from. We apparently shot the podcast around the Clean House special.
Oh wow!
Because that's where Eric was
down.
Yeah, Eric was, he's in that.
Eric's in that, right? Oh wow! So the Red House / the Clean House special, which we didn't know what movie was going to be in it at the time.
Our original plan was that there was going to be no movie.
Yeah.
Or just a movie that we could
or a generic
swap
movie
out.
that we could swap out. Yeah.
Or the fans could just edit whatever they wanted. It could be Star Wars. If they wanted. We were just going to drop the assets.
And then and it just ended up not being like that. It's like it like a movie got edited into it, and people just accepted that as just the episode.
Who pulled the trigger on that? Was it Aaron or?
Aaron edited it.
Did he? Is he the one that decided?
He picked the movie. Yeah, he picked the movie.
I mean, it's a good fit.
Yeah,
there's a lot of parallels. Even though we shot that episode how we do the podcast just from the hip.
Yeah,
Zen filmmaking, which was another thing that came from this era. Podcast.
Yeah, the whole idea of it's just making it up as you go along, but it's still structured.
Right.
We're writing it still, but we're writing it on our feet.
Episode 23 is we get the Wakeless Day podcast, which seeded something that came down.
Yes, this is the opposite of not enough Paul. This is too much Paul.
This was Paul can't travel the 2 hours. We might have been doing these remotely by this time.
Yeah, and then you did one all by yourself.
So this is the one I did by myself. No, Obi-Wan is the loneliest number is the one I did by myself.
Oh, okay, so this is proto Wakeless Days.
So this is proto Wakeless Days. I mean, I think maybe
is this the second one that you did by yourself?
I don't think I did 2 by myself, but I think
it was a running gag because I remember like the cans, like you're sifting through the cans, and then you played some clips of me that were pre-recorded.
Yes, because we might have had internet connections or something, and I just did it, or just went off and did it. But I think Obi-Wan was the one where it was a solo because it's Obi-Wan and it's spelled with an O-N-E. I believe.
The loneliest number.
And then I believe Wakeless Days, when we come back and we kind of revisit that one, you and I are just kind of joking about it, but that sets the seeds for something that shows up years later.
Yes, it takes a long time to come back to the Wakeless Days.
Because we were talking about, well, when did our universe happen? And like, there's not really a universe in this. We don't have our own set universe during this time of the podcast.
No, I don't think so. There was a lot of like creative. We were definitely doing alternate reality where we were making things up that weren't happening, but we weren't in multiversal yet, and it wasn't quite as exaggerated. It didn't quite get all the way up its own ass.
We ended on RetroCon where we did we were supposed to do a live Sleepless Knights show.
We never did.
We were on stage, but I think you just kind of already went into this is what OSI is about mode, and we never really did like an actual like Sleepless Knights.
No.
This was more of a rebroadcast of what you do.
The panel, right?
Yeah.
I think that we were, I don't know, I think because we had everybody there and it was their audio, and I think that it wasn't set up for us to do our podcast.
Right, because I think most of the stuff is a little hard to hear because I think I'm recording off of their speakers, but we had our stuff set up, and then for whatever reason,
and we didn't do it.
Huh? No, we did it.
Oh, we did it.
It's released.
Okay.
But that was the final episode of that year before.
Oh,
before.
Interesting. And then before we took a break.
Did
we even take a break? It just sort of fell apart.
I think it just kind of fizzled out because we were talking before the podcast that there was another project that I apparently was working on for OSI, and I had talked to the guy back in 2018, and I'm editing this project, and I completely forgot about it until we started up a chat again, and I'm like, wow, there was this. The podcast kind of, I think we might have just overworked ourselves by that point because we were shooting stuff at, I believe that's the show where OSI was at as the guest. So we had Sleazy and everybody.
That's where I
there.
got confused because we had that panel with Buddha and Sleazy, and that which was exhausting.
Yeah.
And it might have been we were exhausted and we took a little bit of a break and then just didn't come back.
Never.
That's why that's the moral. Never take a break.
Yes. Before we go out to break, speaking of breaks that we're never going to take.
Never take a break.
When did the whole pantsless thing ever come about? I believe that is in episode
early,
1.
The very beginning. I think the very beginning. Yeah, because I think that we were trying to differentiate. It's like to my right. I used to say that you were to my right or to my left and or left. Right there. So ongoing joke
because there was no visual to it, so that could be anywhere.
So I like the idea of describing. I tried to be descriptive, and I thought, well, obviously I'm wearing a suit and a necktie, and Paul's real casual, and Paul liked to wear cargo shorts and things like that. It's like not proper pants. So then it was just a thing about
proper Christian pants.
Proper Christian pants. And so it just evolved very quickly into where I didn't acknowledge whatever he wore as actual pants, and so he became pantsless, and then you dubbed yourself the pantsless producer.
It's not that much longer where I actually bought like the URL at one point and everything else, and I was just gonna make it a thing. I was gonna actually I thought of it as like one of the places, a possible place where the landing page where the you could get the episodes from or whatever.
Yeah.
Didn't last. I eventually just let it go. But,
that's too bad.
But I think it also played into the fact that it was non-visual, so a lot of the times it just
became
I that I wasn't wearing anything.
It is that same thing of the theater of the mind that I think that later expanded into our multiversal sort of nonsense. I think that whole idea of maximizing that theater of the mind, where if there was a funny opportunity that there's a gorilla in the room with us, or there's something's on fire or whatever, there's no reason to say it's not.
Earlier on, Miss Mittens was the third host too, and eventually she gets phased out.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's right. I remember.
We do a lot of references to her.
Yeah, and then we would wait, right? And we would just pause for her to say something.
Yeah. Whatever. I'd be telling us, I don't get it or whatever.
Yeah. Wow.
I think at some point there was a rivalry between me and her.
I think that is the interest. I guess the most consistent thing is that we've never been consistent. We're talking about doing a podcast. This is the pilot for the podcast. To my right is Mr. Paul Sanders of Bestow TV. Hello, Paul.
I think that's me.
Paul is somehow, for some reason, thought it was okay to not wear pants to the studio.
I'm comfortable not wearing pants,
But I'm not comfortable when you're not wearing pants.
It's not about your level of comfort. Like, look at all the great directors. Hitchcock always put his actresses on edge and stuff. This is me keeping you on top of your game.
This is your technique.
This is my technique. Because, if I could be pantsless all the time, I would.
It's always about Star Wars. It always devolves into a Star Wars conversation. So we've decided for our podcast that we are not going to talk about Star Wars.
No Star Wars.
No.
Nada.
Perhaps Wookiees.
No.
Because Wookiees existed before Star Wars.
Right. So that would make this a no Star Wars pilot?
No pilot. Yes, a no Star Wars pilot.
Correct.
Yes.
Right, because this is the pilot episode.
Not a Star Wars pilot.
Not a Star Wars pilot.
Yes.
But we can talk about stormtroopers, because they're not pilots.
They're not pilots, no. In the second beginning.
Or wouldn't it be like the re-beginning?
It could, the
it's
beginning
like
again.
Hockey Face, the re-beginning.
Yes, that's right. Dollar Store Jason, the legend of Hockey Face.
Speaking of ongoing
3D,
stuff, right?
Yes, ongoing. Oh, okay. So this would be the pre-beginning, but the second actual post beginning, meaning the second beginning after the pre-beginning.
Okay. So basically what, 2018, so RetroCon would probably be like that September, October. So from October to, we don't know when.
So we were gone for 2 years, right?
Yeah.
After RetroCon, we just petered out.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think even during that time, like I wasn't present too terribly much down at the house to produce too terribly much. I mean, I have to look, when did we do Mr. Lobo Does? Was that within that time period?
I feel like that might have been.
Or was it earlier?
I don't know. I feel like the Mr. Lobo Does, we were doing that in, I don't know. When were we doing Mr. Lobo Does? Was that 2017?
Hold on.
Anyway, we were doing a hell of a lot of stuff, and the podcast, I think, had sort of fallen short. and we stopped doing the podcast. And then in 2020, we started it up again. And what did we begin with when we came back?
Not a Star Wars reboot.
Oh, of course.
I do know the name of that one.
Again, I think it's the same situation where before coming back, we looked at what we'd done before and played off of what we did for our original episode. And so
Mr. Lobo does, it was 2017.
Okay. So we didn't so this was 3 years after Mr. Lobo does. Wow. Unbelievable. And this is 2020. So
we were doing Mr. Lobo does before we were doing the podcast, because this is like July, September,
I think,
October.
And maybe I have to say the pandemic might have been an ingredient of coming back.
Well, I know the pandemic was an ingredient of coming back, because we were talking about it and we're like, we just need something to take our minds off of whatever else is going on, and
something we can do, and something we can do in lockdown, something we can do. And I think that the difference here with this second era is mostly remote.
Almost entirely remote for however many episodes. I don't remember what episode number that is, but
so we did, usually it would be on a Monday
at 7:00,
7 p.m. prompt. And then we would be on Skype, right?
Via Skype.
And then
1 to 2 episodes, so we would have an episode in the pocket, which I believe it was something we did early. We would always have an episode in the pocket in case we couldn't record a week.
Yeah.
But I think at one point we got to 2 episodes in the pocket, and maybe at one point had 4 episodes in the pocket.
Yeah. So if there was ever a problem, or if we were too tired or whatever, we had an episode that would release. And that was a lot to try to do it once. I don't know what made us think that we needed to be weekly with it.
Right. I think just the whole consistency things.
That's
the whole thing with like YouTube and everything, is that you have to consistently put out at least once a week, if not more.
It just seems like that all that just seems to work for other people though, and not for us. Like I feel like if we put one good one out a month, we would have gotten the same amount out of it, perhaps.
True. I guess.
I enjoyed making them, but I'm just wondering, like, rather than burning ourselves out, maybe we could have paced ourselves more. I don't know. I guess we don't need to have regrets in the middle of
let's save that to segment 4, because I'll wait till you hear how this era ends.
Oh God. Oh boy. So we did kind of a I think some pretty ambitious things in this era of the.
I think that there were, like, from my end, there was a lot of downtime.
Mm-hmm.
We're really bad at communicating, so there would be, we would talk Monday and we're like, oh, let's talk midweek, and we wouldn't talk again until next Monday.
Right.
So I would have all that time to myself and be like, oh, well, wouldn't it be a funny concept if we did this? Wouldn't it be a funny concept if we did that? And that would start getting incorporated into our weekly podcast.
Yeah. And then
eventually we ended up having, and we didn't really want to have continuity. And if you listen to those episodes, we don't really maintain continuity. It changes from one week to another, or the numbers change, or whatever's going on. But we also wanted to do the theater of the mind, where we wanted to address the pandemic. We knew other, like, YouTubers and stuff were getting their monetization removed if they mention COVID. They were not allowed to mention it, so we had to come up with our own code names. Game Grumps used to call it the Backstreet Boys tour, or Backstreet Boys reunion. So we had come up with
Chronic Diarrhea.
Yes.
Chronic diarrhea was our code for COVID, and so
because we just wanted to talk about how shitty it was.
Well, yes, and we were wearing a diaper instead of a mask, and all of that. So, and I think that, and there was so much happening politically too, that we were trying to deal with that climate.
Yeah, because we never really addressed any politics, and we didn't want to. We didn't want to.
So we had our own fantasy versions of all that. We had the Planet of the Apes sort of taking over, and so the idea was the government was in chaos. We had this disease that was making everything ridiculous. Paul was in isolation because he was in outer space.
Yeah, that was how we addressed the fact that we were doing it remotely.
Yeah. So Paul was in a space pod.
I believe, like, a lot of it was us addressing politics without addressing it. It's a long form of a nada. It's just nada politics by us. So if there was something that was kind of digging at us, we could address it without actually.
We tried to address it without. There was a couple times where you directly addressed some of the things that were pissing you off. That was.
I mean, I tried to keep it off the air,
but you did try to keep it off the air for the most part, and
because we didn't want people arguing in the comments and stuff. We wanted people to enjoy themselves, and if we were reminding them how everything was kind of shitty,
so I think that hopefully that we kept the absurdity up high enough to where it didn't. It resembled real life enough to be relevant, but didn't resemble it enough to be irreverent.
Right. It was obscure enough.
Yeah. So you could kind of let it go over your head, or you could enjoy it on multiple levels.
Or you could decode it.
So again, a lot of inside, I mean, the show has always been kind of thick with inside jokes and kind of playing off of previous concepts and multiple sort of layers, multiple meanings. I think that is one of the things about it that's really good, is that it was kind of dense, in both ways.
Right.
But that's not, again, not everyone's cup of tea, but I think the people who really got a lot out of it. We got some pretty passionate fans of what we were doing.
I feel like that's probably what brought a lot of the fans to the forefront, where we were starting to hear more out of the fans. I mean, even to this day, a lot of people will still address something that's from the podcast or whatever, and we're like, I mean,
people still say chronic diarrhea instead of COVID, and people still.
There's a lot of carryovers to the.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the stuff with the pod drama, especially, which was sort of the thing that you had written. Using a lot of the OSI characters and OSI locations.
All the stuff that we pretty much set up to that point. The whole Miss Mittens Kong.
Yeah.
And the whole history with that.
But a lot of that has kind of carried over into Cinema Insomnia. And, I think a lot of, like, the persona of Alan Smithy definitely became more crossed over into Cinema Insomnia more after the podcast.
Right.
Whereas I think initially Alan Smithy was kept somewhat separate from Mr. Lobo. I think once we had established it within the podcast, it became more of a cohesive kind of world where we've got all of these weird characters or weird versions of myself overlapping. It was really fun. That was something that I really did enjoy, was the whole, again, that brought it back to the whole theater of the mind thing, which was always sort of an element, even in every aspect of it, was the sort of theater of the mind, and kind of challenging ourselves to use the idea that people aren't seeing us.
Right. And we used it to our advantage too, where any other character, they all could record it. They all recorded it by themselves. They sent it to us. We did not, we stayed isolated. So everybody sent their bits, whatever we wrote for them, they sent it in. And we produced this from all of us being in totally separate rooms all over.
Yeah. And what's funny is that it was, it was the most isolated thing, but it felt like the most together thing.
Yes.
It felt like the thing that was the most inclusive and the most together, but in reality, we were the most isolated we were from everyone.
Now, the funny thing is like, you might see the listeners out there might hear a reoccurring theme, but there was a sequel there are notes for a sequel that was written that we never ever got out of the note phase where we were going to go, because we went with the joke of like, well, will Paul survive, even though we've already been producing the podcasts, where I was jettisoned even deeper into space. And I believe it was also a running gag where it was like, well, I don't even know if I survived that. I didn't the podcast ends on a cliffhanger. I don't know how how should we address this. But I keep tripping over notes where there was more stuff written for sequels, and there was more that we just moved ahead.
I mean, we just had to keep going, and we didn't have the resources to, I guess, write a pod drama every week. It wasn't
going to be weekly. I think it was something that was, because
periodically, we just never came back to it.
I think because I had written it, and I think we had like probably talked about it, but it was written for months on end, and it was produced.
Yeah.
But we talked about it on the podcast for a long time.
Yeah.
Like we knew it was coming.
Yeah, we did know it was coming, and it was, like I said, I was really proud of everyone. The voices were really great, and it definitely felt rich. It felt like you felt like you were in a story with. It was really fun.
So we bring back kind of this an idea that kind of happened in the beginning part one.
Yeah.
Where I think it was like by the second episode we were playing games, but we were playing a board game, but it was non-descriptive and it was different. And
oh yeah,
King Me and
that
Yahtzee
was another
and
thing
stuff
too, where we were eating and playing games, and
in this run
we really did play games.
We played Clue and stuff, and that became a favorite thing. And another thing we planned to come back to.
And
that
I was
never,
Mr. Body, so I was dead. So it didn't.
You were
matter.
tired, and you're just like, you guys just do this.
Yeah, and
I believe that's just a solo between me, Dixie, Wendy, and Aaron.
Yeah,
Was Aaron in that?
And I liked mixing it up sometimes where I wasn't there, or that if it was somewhat different or a different combination of people, like we had Miss Wendy, I think, involved in some of them.
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of it being different, and we still did episodes where we interviewed people too. I think we had some of our best.
I think that's Blob Fest came out. That's where Wes Shank came.
Oh
in,
yeah,
I believe it was in this lineup.
Kelly Jones.
We did the Blob Fest was a reoccurring thing for a while.
Yeah, wasn't Kelly Jones in this time?
Kelly Jones was probably in there. When Book of Boba Fett came out.
Oh yeah.
Did that. When Neil Adams and George Perez passed away, you had interviewed.
Oh yeah.
A couple other people.
Yeah.
Deckard.
Well, there was Kelly Jones, the comic book artist, right?
Right.
And then there was Donald David.
Yeah. And was
there another person? Oh yeah, Fred Decker.
The
director. Yeah,
yes.
The director of Monster Squad and Night of the Creeps, and the writer of House, the movie House.
Mm-hmm.
Fred Decker, or RoboCop 3.
RoboCop 3.
But yeah, that was a great one. Yeah, that was a coup. I feel like that was probably one of our higher profile people that we interviewed.
Highest profile, probably.
Yeah, maybe. yeah. Depending on who you ask, right?
I guess.
Yeah. I know that some people were impressed.
I guess there's a lot of that. This might be the start, because we even did this with the. I guess we'll come back to War of the Worlds, but one of the complaints is that there's not enough Paul in there, and I think a lot of the stuff when the interviews there's not enough Paul, and I just kept explaining. It's like, I felt like if I was in there was just too much stuff going on, considering we were all doing this remotely.
Yeah,
and
then trying to have a two
people
on one interview remote would be really difficult.
And I'm like, most of the time, if I was even there, I probably would just shut the hell up and just let you guys do your thing. So that was kind of. I kind of never really felt like I needed to be a part of within those things. I just rather just turn the knobs and the buttons on those things. I don't think I would have said any commentary. However, we did eventually introduce segment 5 within this phrase, which was, I believe the Patreons were the biggest reason for coming back, because it was it's a hike to get from where I live to here.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of one of the things was like, well, if we just did a Patreon and let the Patreons kind of help formulate this. And eventually we were like, well, the Patreons get it early. The Patreons help move this forward. We need to do something for the Patreon. So we did segment 5, and that's where
and and that gives them more Paul.
Yes. So like if I sat out of an interview, we'd come in segment 5 and we'd talk.
Yeah. I guess, I don't know. I guess looking at it now, I suppose that if we did a situation where we had an interview, you and I could do a preamble before the interview.
Yes, we did a lot of that.
And then maybe, like, I'm just saying, what from the audience's perspective, what they might have wanted, or maybe some of them might have wanted, is if you were like Ed McMahon or something, where that's right.
Good one, Johnny.
You are correct, sir. But I mean, it could be something like that.
We did that. I think we did. Well, we did the raps.
Someone, and then you're kind of chime in, periodically.
I would do we would do the raps. I think there was one episode where it's just me alone, and I did the raps or whatever, but you were doing the interviews.
Oh,
so it was kind of like I believe it might have been presented that I intercepted the signal or whatever.
Peppered you through.
Because I think there's one that's just like me and Gal, because we had already established Gal, or me and Miss Mittens, Kong, because we established her, and that they had voices, and so it might have been stuff so that there was a little bit more incorporation.
Yeah, boy. Yeah, boy. Again, we've taken them on a pretty wild trip because, like, most TV show, most programs and radio shows and TV shows, it's all about format.
Right.
And we break format
all the time.
So I think that,
except for when it's a nada.
Yeah.
Even to like your disdain, it's like, hey, haven't we run this to the ground? And it's like, no, we got to keep it up. The fans like it, and the fans did like it.
It's the first. It's number. It ends with a 1, so we have to do this thing. And I'm like, isn't that just sort of an inside joke? Do we really have to do it every time?
And
so
we managed it.
And we somehow managed that. And I think that again, there it's interesting how we have consistencies within the inconsistency, and then inconsistencies within the consistency. We definitely keep them off balance. I'd almost think, like, would it have been better if we did, like, this is again Monday morning football, but maybe we needed to do like an interview show.
Yes.
And then do like a review show. And then did like a pod drama show.
Yes.
And then that way, maybe we wouldn't have had 138 episodes, but maybe the 10 episodes of this or the 10 episodes of that or the 10 episodes of the other would be maybe more cohesive or easier for one person to go from one to the next.
Flashing back to the 2015 diner conversation was that it was at one time it was going to be just the interview podcast.
Yeah.
Because I think I just want to be the guy turning the buttons. I didn't want to be the guy on mic, and now I'm the guy on mic all the damn time.
On mic. Oh yeah.
To everybody's disdain.
See, and it's weird because everybody wanted something different, because it would always be like more Paul, less Paul. It's like, it's like, okay, I don't know. More Paul is good for some, and less Paul is good for others.
It's like, fine, I'll step back and produce. That's fine. No big deal.
Yeah.
And then it's like, then you get an onslaught of, there's not enough Paul.
Yeah.
What's Paul's opinion?
Yeah. So, it's, you can't win.
I ended up becoming a character within the Cinema Insomnia universe somehow.
and if it's just you, that doesn't work at all.
No, that's too much.
It's too much Paul. So so it is hard to find a balance of how much Paul. But honestly, it's like, the thing about it is Paul's all over it. It's like Paul touches every aspect of it.
Gross.
Paul. It's true, inappropriately. He touches it. It's usually Paul comes in with the structure. Usually Paul is the person turning the knobs. Usually Paul is the person editing the content. Usually a lot of times
making sure it's out on time.
Making sure it's all on time. A lot of times, if there's something that's written, you wrote it.
Or it's a note saying, ad-lib this.
Yeah, true.
Write this yourself.
Yes. No, sometimes there is that.
Like when it comes to the War of the Worlds, where it's like, this is what it's supposed to be about. Do it.
Yeah. And we did, but again, it's like, the producer does a lot. So it's not, I think it's interesting, because I think that when you are doing your job right, it is somewhat seamless, and invisible.
Because that was kind of the idea, was that I don't think you wanted to take on the podcast and have another thing on top of Cinema Insomnia and everything else.
Yeah, I already felt like
it's just like, I just come in, I tell you what time to be here, we just do our thing for an hour, and then I make sure it's out on time.
I'm mostly, we collaborate, but I'm mostly the host, the talent, and you were mostly the producer. That I think that was what we were. That's how we came into it.
Before we get into towards the end of this whole thing, can we briefly talk about War of the Worlds?
Oh yeah, War of the Worlds. So again, all these is again with breaking format and trying all these different things. I think one of the things that Paul wanted to do is to try to sort of use this vast. There's all this old time radio content, and Cinema Insomnia basically is like a celebration of vintage material, and then of course I think with Halloween War of the Worlds is kind of like a tradition. A lot of people listen to it on Halloween.
And it's public domain.
And it's public domain. And we were having a lot of problems with using things that we didn't have rights to. And we thought that this would be something that we could, one, get away with. Two, it would take us in another direction. And
Three would be that it would be something that we could drop. We would do like whatever segment or whatever we did at the beginning, and then we would just drop it as is.
Yeah.
Since we were already producing on the weekly, so
Yeah.
Because we wanted to have another thing that just dropped on Halloween.
Yeah.
But not have to take away from whatever. Because as
Yeah.
listeners can see, once we start overburdening ourselves, then it's
right.
Then it starts kind of faltering a little bit.
Yeah. So we didn't want to overburden ourselves, and also, I think October was probably my busiest time.
Yes.
So I think that it was something that we thought would be, kind of a free space, maybe.
Yeah. A treat.
Uh-huh.
A treat, not
A
our
treat.
trick.
Or a trick.
Oh, it was definitely a trick.
And it was supposed to be, it was definitely a trick. The audience did not take to it. I guess they thought that there would be some jokes, or they thought that there would be some host content.
Yes.
And
what I think
one
particular was,
I think it tells you straight off the beginning is that we're just playing this in its entirety.
Yeah. For tradition. I think we bounced back and forth about turning it on and off when it wasn't Halloween or near the holidays.
Yeah.
And, we learned that's probably like our biggest failure. I wouldn't even call it a failure, but it's a learning, a nexus point.
A nexus point, yes, on a fixed point in time. Well, the thing is that, I guess that was a situation where it wasn't enough Paul and it wasn't enough Mr. Lobo either.
At all.
So I think that was sort of the thing, is that the show, I guess that's a thing, that the show is not entirely free form. It needs to have a certain amount of both you and I to be the same show.
And in hindsight, if people really wanted to listen to it, they could just find it and listen to it in its entirety without our insight, or without our. So we're not really presenting anything new.
I suppose not. But so what I think is interesting, and again,
it's not transformative.
This is a affect of you, I think, but you always gravitate to whatever your biggest failure is. Because I feel like that bringing back everything on the strength of our weakest episode.
Are you talking about what just came out not too terribly long ago?
Right.
What ended up becoming the inciting incident of what would possibly be a new beginning?
A new beginning.
Is just kind of taking the thing that
fell on its ass.
Which, ironically enough, we had it done in like April.
Yeah.
Of 20. What are we in?
Are
2024.
we're still
not
here.
We're not here, but I guess we'll jump ahead a little bit since we're talking about War of the Worlds. But it was done in April.
Yeah.
And actually kind of uploaded to YouTube. And then we're like, well, our Patreons are our biggest source. Maybe we should get them to back this. Maybe let's use this to chart how much interest there is. We know from like Twitch and stuff, people bring up the podcast and stuff. Is there enough interest that maybe we could make another go around?
Yeah.
But before we get to the other go around, I also wanted to talk about towards the end of this era.
Yes.
Where we were constantly doing we were so up our ass that we were just constantly doing the reboots, the reboots, we wanted to make fun of I don't know.
Yeah.
Which is it a we thing where we were wanting to make fun of Hollywood and their reboots, remakes, everything that just pisses us off as fans and then viewers.
Yeah.
So we were taking that upon our.
We just kept rebooting our own show over and over.
So all the way up to the ending where it was that final reboot, where we were just, and it included new numbering that were in brackets that didn't detract from the old numbering.
Oh God. What
was it?
The double numbering.
The fucking brackets.
God. The double numbering. Oh, every episode had
a joke within
numbers.
a joke with a joke within a joke within a joke.
God.
And just how much up our own butts we were.
We were pretty far up our own butts, and I think it was irritating not only for us but for Dixie for sure. I think
right
because we were trying to pull her into it as well.
Yes, yes. Because we retired the pantsless decoy. We had brought back a Mr. Lobo sound alike at one point.
Oh yeah, it wasn't actually Mr. Lobo.
It wasn't actually Mr. Lobo.
Yeah.
It was Mr. Lobo's biggest fan or something like that.
Yeah.
Who had the lisp and
Oh,
everything.
yeah, right.
You were talking to the lisp.
And lateral lisp, and
it's like, okay.
I'm such a big fan of Mr. Lobo.
It's
And
like,
then I would
As
put
soon as
on my
it's like,
Mr.
okay,
Lobo
all
voice.
right, we need to do take. Okay, and you go into the Mr. Lobo voice, which funny stuff.
So I mean, it's all great stuff. But I think it just again, I think we kind of hit a wall, and
yeah. Well, I mean, it was building up to what was going to be what would have been just a number one.
Yeah.
Again, which would have been a start of what would have been a season, even though we technically weren't. In the archival mode, I'm creating seasons and trying to track the seasons. This would have been a start of a new season.
Yeah.
And we were building up to that, but on top of that, my computer absolutely took a crap.
Yeah.
We were
wall that we hit.
So we had this
walls that we hit.
We had this episode, and we had at least two more episodes afterwards that were already in the pocket.
Yeah.
And I didn't know when I was going to get back online, when I was going to get the stuff fixed.
Yeah.
And it was just a question of like, well, it might be best to end on that episode.
Yeah.
And if we came back, it would just be brand new.
It would just be whatever,
because that one's already listed.
It's already
as
set up as a reboot, so then we would know that we would just be rebooting from that point.
Yeah, because it's it's final, isn't it?
That final rebooted?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah, final's written in the title, so we already knew it was a final episode, and then the next one was going to be a reboot anyway.
Yeah.
We were toying with those ideas.
So I guess it was a perfect setup. It was a perfect place to start, but it was also a perfect place to have a new beginning.
So we were like, okay, let's stop here and regroup. And the common joke was, well, see you in 2 years.
Yep. And here we are. 2 years later. Oh God, there we go. There we are.
Oh, hold on here. Looks like I'm getting Abacus is spitting out a fax here. Try and get. Oh, geez, wow. Oh, that fax paper's all crunchy. I can hardly read this. Something from corporate again.
Give me the gist.
This is kind of hard to read. The toner is sort of smeary, but I can kind of read this, I guess. It says, from the desk of Alan N. Smithy.
Oh boy.
OSI 74, confidential, do not leak to the public. To the producers and crew of Sleepless Knights podcast rebooted. Well, that's us. Subject.
This seems so familiar.
Does studio mandate of series reimagining for Sleepless Knights podcast. Okay, dear employees, our studio has started listening to listen to feedback from our personally selected test audiences. They have found that the rebooted show is too cliche and overdone.
See, I told you. I've been saying this since the beginning, haven't I not?
So what about the future beginning?
Future beginning.
The beginning of
the rebooted future ending final.
Of
with bracket
the next beginning.
With bracketed numbers within bracketed numbers
yes.
within an equation.
Forever again for the first time, always. We are planning, I guess, a revival and of sorts. With the Sleepless Knights podcast. I mean, it seems it's pODDcast. It's 2 years, so we're due.
It's
right?
2 years. I mean, how did it work? I don't even know. It just became a thing, and then when I pitched the idea of doing War of the Worlds 2024, let's just go back and start somewhere.
Yeah.
Without actually, it wasn't anything that was overcomplicated. Something we could throw out there and we could gauge the viewers. We could restart the Patreon, which is my biggest regret. I should have never stopped the Patreon to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I kept the Patreon going, we would have probably been on our feet much sooner.
Yeah.
But we were like, let's restart the Patreon. Let's do let's start slow and let's do our commentary on our worst episode ever. Let's go back and let's hit the redo button, which actually is kind of fitting considering that the final rebooted episode that's rebooted and we reboot something that we failed at is kind of fitting in our universe. And there's quite a bit of support moving on. People kind of do want to see,
and it was, and it was kind of cool to like, it was an interesting way to kind of come back into it with the War of the Worlds, because again, that was kind of one of our Waterloo kind of moments there. We're like, okay, and it was a chance to kind of build upon something, make something better that we'd done before,
Right.
and then
we could do the thing. We could answer the thing where it's like, oh, there's not enough Lobo and there's not enough commentary on it. We could shoot on the people that were kind of crapping on it. We can shoot on ourselves.
Yeah.
We can shoot on Hollywood. We could shoot on YouTube, which was pretty much what that whole thing does.
Yeah, it does do all of that. And it's funny that the public domain thing had parts of it that couldn't be played.
We lifted the public. It actually, most of it boiled down to the music.
Yeah.
Like the music itself was what was giving us issues.
It's really stupid because, again, you've got this thing that's public domain and then it still can't be played all the way through on YouTube because of
but I think it fits better because it condensed it a little bit more. And then it gave us our own. We got to put our Papa Nana ads in it. And we got our own branding in it.
I think it was good, ultimately good, because we got to, it was another reason to break it up into more pieces because there were portions of it that couldn't be played. But I think it was great because you had a bunch of ideas. I was able to read that, process what you wanted, and then also add to it. And then I wrote some stuff for it. And then we did a segment 5 together like the old days. So it was kind of, I guess,
we actually waited on the segment 5 because we wanted to gauge Patreon interest. And when Patreon
there was a big gap between when we did it and then when we did the segment 5.
So there was interest hit. We did segment 5.
There was some perspective by the time we did the segment 5 on it, for sure.
Yeah, because didn't we do that? We did that like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago. No, it wasn't that long ago.
I mean, because in perspective, we're in like November now, and War of the Worlds was edited and done in April.
Yeah, and then we dropped it for Halloween. So we gave ourselves a lot of lead time, which is what we almost never do for ourselves. No. So it was at least an opportunity to do some promotion, try to get some interest, and we did. And we got some interest in it. We got several people signing on for it.
Yep. We got enough interest that we're doing the reunion special.
Yeah, so it did succeed in the way that we wanted it to, or hoped that it would. And then the other thing that's interesting is that we not only were able to lead into it, but and promote it more effectively. But I think it got some good response. And I think the other thing that was kind of nice was we did the artwork too. We created original artwork for it. So I did.
That could be an ongoing thing. That was the whole.
I did the kind of the spooky version, Halloween version of the logo, and kind of a monstery zombie version of myself, and kind of a cyborg version of Paul. And so
I think they came from overwritten Paul notes, didn't they? Where it's like, oh,
perhaps.
God, you want this? Yeah. Why do you want this?
Yeah, probably.
But it did incorporate another aspect. Something we didn't really talk about what happened in between is that Twitch took off for you. Your studio took off for you, and that's kind of took away what time we had. It definitely took away our Mondays at 7 p.m. slot.
That's true. That is true. And I do feel like, I guess, in a weird way, Twitch kind of fulfilled the idea of forcing me to do the thing I never wanted to do, which was just sort of just talk into a microphone off the cuff live and try to cultivate a weekly audience just by that versus scripted material.
Right.
So I think that in a weird way, I guess it did kind of, but then, there's this whole community of people from the Twitch. And I think that made the podcast easier because there already was this community there.
Right. And they're talking to you in real time, and they're bringing up stuff that's from the podcast.
Yeah.
And everybody's saying pODDcast, and everybody's saying pantsless producer.
Yeah.
And, they're all saying things that are directly tied to the podcast, where it's like, well, maybe it is a time.
They definitely are like the core people. A lot of those same people that were listening to the podcast are on the Twitch stream.
And then, like, you were saying about like this artwork, and the artwork was drawn during the Twitch stream.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. I drew the artwork.
It's all like
live,
interlinked now.
Yeah. In the Twitch stream, and then Spin Master Scott, who back in the old Patreon days bought the spinners. That's why I call him Spin Master, because he was the guy who did the tier on Patreon for the hit.
I thought he was in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because to show you I know a little about Spin Monster Scott.
But he he is one of our moderators on Twitch, and he ended up helping do the coloring job on the on the new logo. So it was kind of nice because we sort of had some, I guess, community support for pulling this.
Community support, and it was a direct line of going, you want more of this.
Yeah. And the other thing is you've been coming in here and engineering the streams on Saturday nights. So I think, again, the podcast fans that were already there got to see you.
Right.
And then
they didn't really necessarily ever see my
people
face.
Who got to, no, they didn't necessarily. And the people who got to know you because of you running the streams when especially during my vacation, they got to see you.
Yeah.
They had some context to maybe check out the podcast.
Yeah. And that's also where I would pick out a lot of people. That's where I would note people were fans of the podcast because people would be saying gross. Which is not really necessarily anything that we would particularly call up, but it's just something that I did since episode 1.
Sure. Gross. Yeah. There were a lot of, and then of course podcasts with the double D's and all.
There's a lot of people throwing those phrases. I would say something, and then all of a sudden, you see gross pop up in the chat. Somebody's recalling.
Yeah. So I think that there was kind of chronic diarrhea and some of that other stuff. So there definitely was a lot of those core people from the podcast in the core of the Sleepless Knights. But again, there'd been this 2-year period. So there were people who had no idea that a podcast even existed.
I think there might have been a few that
that they were very excited
brand new
to discover, and then there were I know that Karen, she went and started from the beginning, I think. And listened to
because a lot of them, because I think probably, was it when you were away is when I started doing the archive? Because that's another key point that we didn't really talk about, was that I had decided to bring the archive back onto my Yoo-Hoo tubes where I could monitor it. I could play around with titles. I could play around with the thumbnails. I could play around with whatever to try to find that darn audience, to try to hit those numbers that I believe are just imaginary and made up.
Yeah.
Just there to frustrate you.
Yes.
So in doing the archive, or bringing the archive back around, was introducing new people when we were talking about it on the Twitch stream, where they're listening to it as it's dropping. So it's almost brand new to them.
Yeah.
Because I think even Karen are bringing up things where they're like, oh, well, I didn't know this happened. When did this happen? Did this happen a couple weeks ago? And I'm like, no, that's 2017.
Yeah. That happened a long time ago.
That's a long time
Yeah.
ago. Which is also an ongoing project. I'm actually kind of stymied right now because I'm up to the pod drama. And that takes up too much resources that my computer just can't handle.
Yeah, wow.
It's probably going to be on hold until I can actually tend to it in January. So it'll be after this episode.
Well, I mean, like I said, so now we're in the future, I guess, the beginning of the future.
Somehow managed 2 years yet again.
Yeah, somehow took another 2-year break, and here we are recording this reunion. This time,
since we are reunited many times over before.
Yeah, this isn't really a reunion.
I guess it's a reunion because it's official. An official podcast.
It's an official podcast
with both of us in it.
It was kind of like, it felt like when we did segment 5 for War of the Worlds, that felt like it was almost like doing our podcast.
Stay on brand.
Podcast vibes, yes. Don't mess with the rebrand. But I mean, as far as I guess we haven't even scratched the surface of what changes we may or may not want to make as far as format, or how frequently we want to do it, or how
what have we learned? Because there's technological changes within those 2 years. There's technological changes since 2017.
Yeah.
What do we want to do? What do we learn? Obviously we learned something with War of the Worlds. What do we learn with the podcast?
Yeah.
Overall?
What do we want to keep?
Podcast.
What do we want to keep? What do we want to throw away? And what did we didn't get to do that we maybe might want to try and do this time around?
And I think with this reunion special, it's a good way of getting feelers out for people to comment wherever they can comment and let us know before we get to.
Yeah, it'd be good to know. Tonight we're doing our another live stream. We're gonna go pick up Aaron from the airport. Maybe we'll record another podcast. I don't know. But we definitely want to go ahead and try and get ready for tonight. How are we on time?
We're wrapping up. I think we can call this one. So we got to do a rebooted reunion next year or next 2 and or 4 years.
Next 2 podcast years.
Years.
Next 2 and or 7 years.
Maybe this is the final Sleepless Night. I probably shouldn't say that.
No.
Final one for the next 2 to 4
Can't
years.
even joke about that. That would suck. We'll just do one episode every 2 to 6 years, to whether we need to or not.
It's just going to be whatever we pull out of the public domain and throw our trash in front of.
That's right. Just take some old episodes of The Shadow and throw them up there and call it a show.
So how does the show end? We had a pre-recorded plate that we used since the beginning. Do you remember?
Oh.
Can you sign off with that?
Let's see here. This has been the Sleepless Knights podcast. The best thing about being an insomniac is never having to say goodnight.
Good night.
You have been listening to the Sleepless Knights podcast, or should we say, pODDcast.
Oddcast.
Emphasis on the odd. Our theme is by Mars Homeworld at Dead House Music. Our opening announcement is by Ophelia Necro. She does a radio show called Suicide Watch. Patreon supporters get to hear this podcast before anyone else and a lot of other great stuff, right, Paul?
Sure.
Doesn't get it better than that, right? So come join the fun at
patreon.com/Sleepless Knights podcast.
Please stay up with us next week for another Sleepless Knights podcast. Or should we say, pODDcast.
Oddcast.
The best thing about being an insomniac is never having to say goodnight.
Good night.